So hello, everyone. Welcome to our I-CBT Friday discussion group. We're a group of clinicians who meet regularly on Fridays to share information about learning I-CBT and using it with clients. So thanks so much for being here and for being a part of this. I'm Mary Hosbrough, and I facilitate these discussions along with Margaret McCall and Sylvie Levine, and I'll be facilitating today. So last week we had a great general open discussion, just meeting and discussing any I-CBT related topics that came up, and I found that really meaningful. So we'll be peppering more of those opportunities in throughout the summer. And today we're having a special topic presentation by Bronwyn Shroyer and Katie Marrotte, who will be discussing grief and guilt in OCD recovery. So we invite you to type questions in the chat and they'll respond to them after their presentation. And this is being recorded, and that recording will be posted on the I-CBT website and the YouTube channel. So please don't ask any client-specific questions or discuss case details in which a client might recognize themselves or someone else. So in a moment, I'll invite Katie and Bronwyn to introduce themselves, and then I will drop links to their OCD training school page, as well as to the I-CBT website and the YouTube channel and the clinician's manual in the chat. So if you're ready, Bronwyn and Katie, I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay. You guys see my slides? Yep. All right. So let's see, where do we want to start, Katie? Even though we're OCD specialists, obviously, but today we're actually going to talk to you guys as OCD sufferers. So we're going to take a more personal look at OCD throughout this particular process and recovery. But I'm Bronwyn Shroyer. I'm an LCSW in Indiana, and Katie and I, along with Gina Abundante and Brittany Goff, run the OCD training school. And I'll let you take it over, Katie.
Fabulous. So I'm Katie Marrotte. I am an LCSW in Connecticut and lived experience clinician. So I also have OCD.
Ready?
I'm ready. So don't get us wrong. We are thrilled to be in recovery. And after spending a year subclinical, we are officially considered in recovery from OCD. Yay! But when the OCD lifts, you have to face what the OCD has done. And a light gets shown on what was missed, what was damaged, what was neglected, what was harmed, and the things that were lost. It's like we're getting unplugged from the matrix, and reality is not what we thought it was. We go, oh, thank goodness it was all made up. And then we have a reckoning. Oh, shit, it was all made up. This whole time, we've been treating hypothetical horror movies as if they were real, and there is no doubt that things were taken from us. We have wasted a lot of time needlessly stuck in our imaginations, and I mean a lot. My OCD onset was in childhood. I remember my first intrusions in first grade, and I didn't get proper treatment until I was 31 after going through years of useless therapy. Detox, inpatient, 3 months of outpatient for a substance use disorder, a week-long intensive trauma-focused program, and years of individual therapy. Everyone missed the OCD or diagnosed it as trauma or generalized anxiety. I actually diagnosed myself post-grad school when I had already been a therapist for 2 years, working thousands of clinical hours and received nearly 100 hours of clinical supervision.
And mine was diagnosed at 15 and did talk therapy, medication, other treatment modalities. Nothing was able to stop the doubting process. So even though I was able to control my compulsions a bit easier, the doubts kept coming and coming all the time. This is the total number of days that Katie and I have spent suffering from OCD. This is the number of days that I have suffered since doing other treatment options. And Katie,
Yeah, mine was difficult to calculate because I never graduated ERP. I didn't get subclinical through ERP and ACT, despite my wonderful therapist's best attempts.
This is the number of hours that Katie and I have very conservatively guessed we have spent in compulsions.
Many days it was the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. I was a queen of rumination, the queen of avoiding that very kind of Puro presentation, if we want to call it that. Lots of mental compulsions. So I can't even calculate how much time I spent doing compulsions.
Yeah, I think this is a very conservative estimate on our part, because for me, there was so much mental rumination, but also neutralization happening constantly. So this is a very conservative estimate. How many people we love that were affected by our OCD?
All of them.
Every single one. So let's take a look at the effects of OCD on the world. There are an estimated 8 billion people on Earth right now. And it's estimated that 1% of people have OCD. So, which means that right now, 80 million people are suffering like Katie and I did. Let's see the opportunity for grief and guilt among that population. So if we take those 80 million people and we say that they only have OCD for 1 year, totally not likely. 1 year that's not happening, but we're just going to base this on 1 year. And let's say that they only have compulsions for 2 hours a day. Again, how many of your clients are only compulsing for 2 hours a day? And if they're compulsing for 2 hours a day, think of how many doubts they're getting on top of that. And let's say that each one of those people is only getting watched suffering by 2 loved ones, just 2. Okay, we're just going to go with the very conservative things. Let's see what that gives us. 58,400,000,000 hours of compulsions in 1 year, just 1 year. 29,200,000,000 days of suffering with that in just 1 year. And then those 2 loved ones plus the OCD sufferers, that's 240 million loved ones. Those are huge numbers. When you look at a number like 58,400,000,000 hours of compulsions in just a year, then we can reasonably guess that that's super underestimated. How many moments in life do you think are getting interrupted by OCD each year? How many relationships are getting damaged? How many opportunities are lost? And then why does that matter? Recovery is amazing. You are so much better at understanding how OCD is created and what the obsessional reasoning process is doing. The magic of the OCD is out in broad daylight now. Its tricks are understood and no longer hold the same power. But when you reach recovery, you can look back at what was lost, damaged, and missed. All of those moments add up, and that leads to big waves of feeling: regret, guilt, shame, grief, sadness, anger. And you might be thinking, but people with OCD are still having good moments too, right? It isn't all caught up in OCD. And yes, that's true. There are good moments, and some of them are not ruined by OCD. Sometimes we can look back and see good moments that are just good moments. And other times, those witnessing us living what looks like good moments might think we're okay, but you have no idea what's going on underneath all of that unless you've been there. So the ripple effects on the potential for grief and guilt due to lost moments, relationships, and opportunities are enormous. But my picture disappeared. Anyway, there's supposed to be a picture of me here, high school graduation. Katie, I can see yours is still there, so we're good. Here's an example of what grief and recovery looks like. So imagine me at 18, smiling in my cap and gown. I don't know what happened to the picture. When you see that picture, you see a smiling graduate. And I do too when I look back at that picture. But I also know what was happening underneath that cap and gown. My fingertips were always in my sleeves. Always. Always. I didn't touch anything, ever. If I touched something, I knew it was going to destroy whatever moment I was in was going to be taken away immediately if I touched anything, because then I would start to do all the stuff that was going to happen with my OCD. I was going to have all those doubts starting to get created, and I was going to think about all these ways I was going to hurt everybody. So I walked around for years not touching anything. I had long sleeves on all the time. Doubts constantly running through my head all the time. I could have gone to a ton of different schools. I didn't. I couldn't. I ended up staying very close to home for college. And then even when I was at college, I was coming home all the time. So I lost a huge part of my college experience to OCD, pretty much all of my college experience to OCD. I also went into a really big depression when I was in college, slept for like 16 hours a day for a period of time, in part to my OCD. So all of that was stolen. I can't get that back. So what also you would have seen in this picture if it had shown up, I don't know what's going on with Canva today. It's the whole grief and guilt thing. It was like, haha, we're going to get Bronwyn because she loves Canva so much. But with that whole thing was another 20 plus years of suffering on the horizon for me. So I wasn't even out of the woods close yet. I still had 20 more years of moments getting interrupted, events totally destroyed with OCD, relationships suffering, all of that was coming. So when I look back at this high school picture of me, graduation day, what I see is just more pain about to come.
So here I am. Here's a happy bride and a loving husband on their wedding day. In this picture, we are soaked to the skin. That dress is so heavy. I'm not just lightly carrying it like a princess. I am dragging it because the rain is coming down sideways. I am completely soaked. It's sleeting on us. It's 40 degrees. It's wickedly windy, normal May Icelandic weather. And do not ask me to pronounce the name of that nature preserve because I just can't. What you don't see is that I am plagued with doubts and have been for this entire relationship which began in 2013. I just graduated with a master's. I just got my first job post-grad. We eloped to Iceland to celebrate my graduation and get married in a Norse pagan ceremony. I'm grappling really heavily with sexual orientation doubts and doubts that I really loved my husband. The entire ordeal is torture. I avoid setting up the trip. Picking out my wedding dress, I feel hollow and distressed. I don't even write my vows because I can't bring myself to. I've had these doubts for years, and they started around when I tried to go to college the first time and inevitably dropped out due to OCD and substance use. Now they're terrible because I'm committing my life to somebody forever. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror as I'm getting ready on my wedding day and telling myself, I'm a fraud. I'm doing the wrong thing. But now I'm in way too deep, so I guess I'll just have to figure this out later. I feel as if I'm tricking my partner into a sham marriage, a marriage built on a lie. After all, aren't you supposed to be 100% sure that you want to marry someone? Isn't it unfair to marry someone if you're not sure of your sexuality? I feel like a terrible person. I feel driven to confess, but I don't. I don't say anything until I break down 2 years later, mid-pandemic, right after moving into a new house together, and finally discover that I have OCD. What kind of person doesn't know their sexual orientation? What kind of person wakes up and is someone that they don't recognize? Somebody who's unprepared? Somebody who gets blindsided? Some bumbling idiot who has no idea what's going on and doesn't know who they are and is completely clueless. And so I've developed a lot of vigilance around trying not to be clueless. Here's a list of events and big life moments that were interrupted for us by our OCD. We now look back at these memories and we can see how OCD messed with them. College experience, deaths, graduations, anniversaries, family events, dating, vacations, weddings, moving, holidays, births of children, and hobbies. Every realm of our life is affected by the OCD. And it isn't just realizing what OCD stole. It's realizing that you were creating the lies all along, but you didn't know it. So how does it feel to know that you were the unwitting architect of your own suffering, that you suffered countless hours and affected the people around you, and it was all made up? I think you can guess. It feels bad. We thought we were keeping ourselves and others safe. We thought we were protecting everyone. We thought it was our responsibility to hold the fabric of our lives together. The compulsions were the glue keeping the things that we cared about the most secure. We thought that if we stopped, we would become the people that we feared the most, negligent and clueless people. people who cause harm by accident, people who, if they had just tried a little harder, could prevent disaster. There's a lot of guilt here, a lot of shame, sadness, and grief over things that were lost, over the real consequences of a false story. And here's an I-CBT lens on this. In remission and recovery, we see the lie of the feared possible self. We're happy to be our real selves, and we are finding joy in discovering who we really are. But now the real selves that we know ourselves to be also have to see what we lost and the pain that came to others. I-CBT also highlights that our compulsions are useless and move us closer to becoming the people we are trying to avoid becoming. I was clueless as to reality, clueless as to how much I was causing the people around me to suffer. I was clueless to everything outside of the bubble.
And to go along with that, my big fear was being negligent, accidentally negligent. Guess what I was when I was in the bubble? I was negligent of my life, of the people around me. So you look back and you figure out, oh my gosh, being in the bubble actually makes that feared self like that exists there, right? It doesn't exist out here. So in remission and recovery, once that big, terrible, stormy cloud lifts and your brain suddenly has all the space free for use, you notice things. Not only are you noticing your senses and that you can trust them, but you're also noticing your life, how different it feels, how awesome that is, how amazing it is to have control over a reasoning process that had run your life for so long. That newfound space in your brain also lets you see the growth that you've done. It's terrific, but when you see the growth, that means you also have to see where you were before you grew. And things that were under that big stormy cloud of OCD that was happening all the time are now seen in a new light. So new questions come up. Things like, did my OCD hurt my relationships with loved ones? The answer for me is 100% yes. Everyone was hurting because I hurt. It wasn't fun to watch a loved one go through OCD. It's hard for anybody here who has a loved one with OCD. Heart breaks for you, goes out to you in big ways because it's hard. And I hurt everyone because when in the bubble, I was irrational and angry and freaking out. Of course I was. I believed that I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. Anyone would act that way if they believed that if they believed what OCD was telling them, which is that I'm the thing that stands between safety and danger for everybody I love. So you'd be doing everything you could to keep your loved ones safe too, even if that meant in that moment that you were saying to them things like, no, you're the one that's being stupid. I'm listening to this thing. Like, these are rules that I know to be true, right? And I'm doing this to protect you. Well, it's all based on a false reasoning process. So it was all for nothing. And that's a pretty sobering thing to come to grips with. Did I lose out on opportunities? Again, the answer here is yes, both Katie and I did. I didn't go on to get my PhD. I lived for fear rather than life. I held myself back in order to be safe. I never studied abroad. I didn't do brave things that I wanted to do. Did my youth get wasted? 100% yes for this question for me. My youth was in a tornado of worry. I didn't get to have it. What do I do about the harm my OCD brought to others? So now you have to consider if there's something you could do about the pain that OCD caused your loved ones. And a follow-up question to that is that my fault, the pain that I caused? The answer here for me is no. The OCD is not my fault. For anyone watching this video later, if you have OCD, your OCD is not your fault. That doesn't mean that my OCD didn't cause real pain. It did, but my intentions were never to cause pain or sadness or frustration or anger or disappointment or any of the tons of other negative emotions my loved ones had to feel when I was in the bubble. But my OCD brought all that out, right? My intentions were to keep those people safe or keep myself safe. I'm guilty of wanting to protect others. I'm not guilty of wanting to cause pain. How do I repair those relationships? This question can be hard to answer. Each relationship is different, but I will say that my experience has been positive in this regard. People have really been gracious and understanding, and they were the whole time. You know, they knew that I was in pain and that I was suffering. But now that I'm better, we're just repairing as we go. How do I come to terms with what I lost? This one can be hard to grapple with. Those moments can't be restored. So what has worked for me is to think about how much I've gotten through despite my OCD, that I did the things I did do, even though I had OCD on a loudspeaker in my brain the whole time. I could have lost more. I persevered through a lot. So as we continue to pivot from who we thought we might be to who we really are, we can find wonderful qualities that can help with those hard emotions, all that stuff that comes along with shame, sadness, grief, guilt, and anger. We can show self-compassion. We have been through a lot inside the bubble. We didn't do any of it on purpose. We were also trying our best while in the throes of OCD. We can look at our ability to make amends. Our real selves can now attempt to correct any harm our OCD caused. And we can notice that we now have better control on that process. We don't have to keep the lives of our loved ones small anymore either. We can celebrate that we now have insight and understanding into ourselves that we didn't have before. That can be energizing and comforting in big, big ways. And we can see our resilience. We can celebrate all the hard things we've done, gotten through, fought to overcome. People with OCD are tough. Living in your own personal horror movies for years or decades on end is awful. I want everybody to think, have you ever been in a movie and you're like, oh my God, I do not know that I can stand this level of like action for much longer. Like I need this to come to the climax so I can get the resolution and it ends, right? Okay, well, imagine being in that for decades where it just keeps going and you go and go and go. I mean, you have to be tough to be able to withstand something like that, right? So people with OCD are tough. We can have optimism for the present moment in front of us and for the future outside of OCD. It's a new life that gets to be experienced through the senses now that we can trust them. And we get to truly experience reality now, not a made-up story version of it. So through this work, we can help our clients create a story. Are you surprised? It's I-CBT, right? So we can use stories. So we can help them capture this grief and guilt narrative. So here's one that I could have written for me. My OCD stole so much from me. So many events were ruined because OCD was in my head. So many opportunities were lost because I wasn't brave enough to do them due to OCD making me so afraid. I wasted so many years on a reasoning process that was based in falsehood. I feel tricked. I feel horrible for the pain I put my family through. I feel bad for what I cheated myself out of. I can't get any of it back. So you can help your clients capture these feelings, put them in a story. Let them get them out, hear them out. And then we do what we do. We help them write a new story. So we can make an alternative story. And this one is with a recovery twist. So you can take the feelings about the past and what was lost and look for ways the real self showed up and was battling through it all the whole time. You can also add in elements of where the real self is now and what's to come if you wanted to, if that fits with your client. So let's read through this one together. My OCD caused me to lose out on a lot and brought pain to people I love. So I'm not hiding what happened here when I write this story. I'm going to state it, and then we're going to see where it goes. I followed my obsessional reasoning because I truly thought I could become my feared possible self, someone who is accidentally negligent. Because of my obsessional reasoning process, I truly thought my loved ones could be in danger if I didn't do my compulsions. That says that I didn't want them to get sick or get hurt. That shows that I care deeply for people. I'm a fierce protector. I put the safety of others as a priority. OCD kept me from doing things I wanted to do. It stole many moments from me and kept my life small. On the surface, I can see that I made those decisions out of fear, and there was fear, but I can see the bravery there too. Everything I achieved while being tortured by OCD is something I achieved despite being inundated with obsessional doubts and compulsions. That was brave. That was hard work. That was the real me doing that. And the real me now can take what I have learned while healing my OCD and experience my life through a real self lens moving forward. My loved ones now get to see the real me too.
So what can therapists do to help their clients with the grief and guilt? Therapists can hold space for feelings. You can listen. You can offer validation. You can help reposition the client to their real self, celebrate their growth and their recovery, normalize it. This is a normal part of recovery. And always we can be working to address shame and encourage self-compassion. So while knowing that we were unwittingly creating obsessional doubt as frustrating, we now have the power to see the process for what it is thanks to I-CBT. Not only can we see it, we can now do something about it. We have our agency back.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this and we'll chat. Everyone totally bummed. No one's going to say anything for the rest of the time.
There was no way to make this happy and fun. I'm sorry.
Sorry, guys. Just can barely get through without crying, let alone just talk about it. So
I don't know if I'm just speaking for myself or anyone else, but I could barely get through this without crying as well. So I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat, and there's some comments that have come in that I will try to read without crying, or maybe I'll just cry. That's fine too. But so far, no questions. Of course, Stephanie's comment is more humorous, you know, no doubt things were taken from us was a quote, intentional pun.
Oh yeah.
that was intentional.
Yes, the moment of brevity and lightness in this. Lucy says people with OCD get so used to hiding their true feelings regarding Bronwyn's story about graduating high school.
The amount of times that I pushed myself through something where I was not feeling it at all, that's like immeasurable too. I don't even know how many of those there are.
Mm-hmm. Angie says oh, go ahead, Katie.
I asked my husband yesterday as we were finishing up this this presentation, I asked him, can we just go back to Iceland for a vow renewal and just not invite OCD? And he said, absolutely, let's do it.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. I love that idea.
Yeah,
I do too.
Take your real self to Iceland.
Yes.
I mean, your real self was there before, but this time real self gets to come out.
Yes. Very much so.
Angie says such a beautiful testament to the vulnerability inside this group. Thank you.
I want to say this is going to be great to share with my clients when we work on the brief. I got tears in my eyes still, but really, I thank you guys for sharing your story. It was great. And I get teary eyed when my clients start talking about the grief. It's really, I grieve with them because it's so palpable. I appreciate y'all doing this.
Margaret, I almost sent you a private message saying, I'm crying. So if they end and need to take questions, will you jump in for me?
Well, there are definitely things in this presentation that I knew I would not be able to talk about without like sobbing through the whole thing. So I feel for you, Margaret. I get it. I stayed away from topics on purpose because it is
And
hard.
imagine how validating that will be for clients who are coming to watch this. And I especially appreciate that you're willing to have this posted publicly so we can share it with clients. To see the strength and resiliency and all of those things that you listed that you're still demonstrating and that you're still working through, even though you are the rock stars of I-CBT, you know?
It's a process and it's normal. It's normal. This is a normal part of recovery to when you kind of wake up from this nightmare to look back and go, oh man, oops, yikes. Yeah, big oops, right?
I have a question. So one patient that I'm working with right now who's dealing with guilt and shame, there's lots of anger. There's anger, incredible amount of anger at herself, at the OCD. And I'm wondering about that component of it, the anger
We had a slide in there about anger and I ended up taking it out because, not that it's not part of the process, but because I knew that I would go off track with the anger piece. I have a lot of anger. I'm still working through a lot of my anger. There's a lot of anger.
Yeah, I was thinking about anger as we were putting this together a couple of weeks ago when we had first started kind of collaborating and thinking about being angry at everybody who missed this for me along the way, and all of the years that I spent needlessly suffering, doing the wrong treatments with the wrong diagnosis and getting nowhere, and feeling angry and irritated. That I think, a lot of people with OCD can recognize this, that it took me so long to get diagnosed. I had OCD since I was in 1st or 2nd grade. I mean, I was like, what, 6 or 7, and I didn't diagnose myself after going through grad school in a clinical program until I was already 31. I'd already been in the field for 2 years. I didn't know what OCD looked like. That's a failing. So I was pretty bad about that, but I had a really cool real self moment where I was thinking about, wow, there were really a lot of people and a lot of systems and a lot of professionals who really dropped the ball with my treatment and with my diagnosis. And then I had this real self thought that went, it's all right, I always handle my shit anyway. And it's like, wow, what a total polar opposite of my feared self, which is like, oh, I'm just this clueless bumbling moron who doesn't know anything and gets blindsided all the time. And it's like, no, that's not it. I handle my shit. I take care of myself. I'm the one who diagnosed me. I'm the one who, got myself into recovery, and got myself into proper treatment.
I think I just want to speak to that because I mean, I was in the mental health field for like 15 years probably before I figured out I had OCD, and it was only because my nephew, who was 8, had it. I've told this story, but it just, it's hard for me not to kind of, just really sob when I think about it. And I do presentations on this to therapists who don't treat OCD, and I just really want to encourage everybody to, I don't want us as OCD therapists to be in our own bubble, because there's so many people who still don't understand OCD, and it's a huge failing of our training, huge failing. That I could go through it and not know I had OCD is ridiculous. I still thought it was hand washing, and fear of germs, and so I just want to appeal to everybody to keep educating your non-OCD therapist friends and community.
Thanks for that, Lucy. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
There are more comments in the chat and a few more questions. And I know people have been jumping in and everyone seems fine with that. So I'm going to go back to a couple of the questions that might not have been fully addressed yet. And then is it okay if people just also continue to jump in and converse or raise hands or whatever is comfortable for people?
Yeah, let's do it.
One question was confronting the grief an obstacle to getting better? It seems so hard to go there.
Wasn't an obstacle for me because, as bad as all this stuff is that we're talking about today, not having to deal with OCD, I will take it, right? I am grateful to be at the stage where I have to look back and notice the grief and guilt. That was going to be there. All the things were happening anyway. Now it's stopped, and now I don't have to continue losing moments, hurting loved ones, all those things. So no, not an obstacle for me getting better, confronting the grief, but definitely something that has been necessary. And you have to remember too that Katie and I your clients have you. Katie and I did this ourselves. We didn't have somebody else doing our I-CBT with us. We had to do it ourselves. And so there's another piece of anger that I won't go into right now, but that's why I had to drop that slide.
I wouldn't say that grief is an obstacle for me getting better either. I had already had several years of substance use recovery and had already been through the grief and guilt process and making amends and all of the good stuff that comes along with that recovery. So I was pretty well practiced in, all right, got to cut myself a break, messed up, etc. And also I was at a point where I was so unbelievably ready to just be done with OCD that I said, I'm just going to go through it, and we're going to put this little piece, we're going to put this piece in the back burner, and I'll get there when I get there. But for right now, I got to be the priority.
Thanks for sharing those experiences, because I didn't write that question, but once I read the question, I was seeing that in some of my clients that maybe it is sometimes for them that it shows up as a form of obsessional doubt again, oh, I failed in these ways, if they're looking at it as failure with the guilt and shame aspect, you know, and before they've really even worked their way through the modules, they can already start to see it when it starts to unravel. And then that becomes more obsessional doubts. Like, I'm taking that as evidence that I'm still going to fail or still failing in other ways, you know? So it's complicated.
It is complicated. And another layer there that can happen is that you've been able to blame your OCD for stuff, and now your OCD disappears. So now what are you going to do when something doesn't happen? You can't say, oh, it's because of my OCD, right? So there's some gain there to keep the OCD around for that bit as well.
I wanted to share also, first I want to thank you both for such a beautiful disclosure of your process. And I have so much pain for so many years of suffering that you didn't receive proper treatment, and so much admiration for what you have done for yourselves. That's really amazing. I was wondering if at times, I have a client in mind, but at times the emotional reactivity of the grief may also be like one bridge again into the OCD. I have a particular client who was struggling with a particular emotion, and that was very much the core of her vulnerable self. So having gone through this, when she tapped on that emotion, having gone through all the models and feeling better, she almost like relapsed again, and we had to go through the model again. So I was just thinking, like, so much of OCD is almost like emotional reasoning on steroids, like Carl says. So I just think that there's a value of addressing the grief. I actually put earlier in the chat, perhaps that's the 13th module that we need to include, because there could be an unresolved issue just from emotional reasoning stemming from the grief in that process.
Yeah. And, you know, the feared self work still has to happen too, because you still have, you know, other things that have led, you know, got the obsessional reasoning part that leads to that feared self, but then there's all, you know, background stuff that's happened in your life too, right? And so we have to keep working on those pieces as you enter into recovery as well. Like other things that help to lead to the formation of that can now start to come to the surface as well. Yeah.
And I think what I wanted to ask you both, if it's in that process of the grief process, is just grief work. Like, sometimes when we do OCD treatment, we have to deal with trauma, and that's trauma work. It's like, this would be a parallel to that process, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is a similar question. And Susan, you asked this, so maybe you could elaborate. Like, it might be similar to what I was asking and similar to what Sylvia was asking. But some of my clients express much guilt and remorse, as you just described, before getting that far in the modules. It needs to be addressed, as you detailed, right? Was the question.
I don't see any reason why you can't pause and process the grief. Because the grief can come up. It doesn't have to be after module 12 when we're all the way to real self and relapse prevention. It can be anywhere in this process, anywhere where we've had that light bulb, like, oh my God, I just made up all of this stuff. That might come up.
And Katie, that's why I am so careful at module 5 when I introduce OCD as 100% imaginary, that I don't make light of that at all. I make sure they understand. I have a whole preamble before I even pull up that slide with them.
Yeah,
I've had
it's
people
not the fun imagination.
Susan, do you feel like that answered your question?
Yes, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Mary. That was great.
Sure.
Another question, any thoughts on how to address this in therapy in a sensitive way without facilitating staying stuck or avoiding recovery?
Yeah, there can be fear to face this stuff, right? And you could see how that might get in the way of something. But I mean, my experience has been that I already knew like at some level that I was harming my loved ones. Like, you know, I mean, I knew that. So none of this is like surprise stuff that's coming up. But I don't know. I wanted to get better so badly. Like, and at this point, when I-CBT landed in my world, I never thought I would get better. Like, I had resigned myself to a life like this that you heard about. That's what I was just like, well, this is, I'm just gonna have to live like this. This is it. I've done the stuff. I've tried the stuff. I have put in a lot of work, and this is just it. So I was there, and there wasn't like, when I-CBT landed in my lap, I was like, oh, what do you mean? Like, there's something else? Okay, well, and I want this to be said because I think that this is an important thing. And I know that this is not going to be everybody else's experience. But almost 30 years of suffering, I-CBT, 3 to 4 months, 3 to 4 months. And I had resolved all that. That's not going to be everybody's. And I get that. And nor am I saying that I-CBT is a magic cure-all for everyone out there. It's not. But for me, if that hadn't come, then I had already resigned myself to another, I don't know how many years I live, right? I'd resigned myself to that. And that 3 to 4 month time frame gave me what I have now, which is amazing. So there wasn't anything where I was afraid of having to face the past. I was just surprised that there was a future.
I had also resigned myself. I thought, I'd been doing ERP with ACT for, I honestly don't know, maybe a year, maybe a little bit more. And I was just kind of like, all right, you know what? I'm pretty good. And if this is as good as it gets, then I guess that's okay. Maybe I'll try a med in the future if it gets worse. I was, I had kind of resigned myself to like, this is just about as good as it's going to get, because I gave the standard treatments a try. And then I-CBT, I found it, and it was like, oh, there is something else. Oh my God, this makes total sense. This is exactly what I needed, because I kept getting hooked by, why do I keep having obsessions? And there was no explanation in another model that scratched that curious itch enough for me to drop it and put it down and go, oh, that's it. This makes total sense to me now, because I'm terminally curious. I'm really nosy. I like to know. I want to know everything about everything that I'm interested in. And I want to know why I'm having obsessions. And I want to know why I keep getting stuck. And the available explanations didn't do that for me until I found I-CBT. And very much like Bronwyn, it was a quick turnaround. It was like, this is it. I figured it out. Okay, it's resolved. I can put it down. What a gift.
Yeah, seriously.
I think I've hit the questions that were in the chat, and there are some more comments thanking you, of course, but I'm not going to go through and read all those because there's so many of them. But I could send them to you afterwards if you would like. But I'm just going to pause and see if there's more questions or comments that come up that people just want to jump in and talk about.
I want to read Carl's comment. He quoted Robert Bly and says, where you are wounded will be your greatest contribution to society. And that is so appropriate right here and right now. You guys have contributed so much to this community from your woundedness or from your recovery.
Oh, man, I need to like write that on my wall.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Like if anybody would make me cry, it would be Carl. But and only because, he is such a he is, besides Fred and Kieran, of course, Carl is the reason Katie and I are where we are.
Carl, you want to say anything?
He wrote grok in the chat.
Carl, we know you're here.
Hey.
Bye.
Thank you. And I can't tell you how inspiring both of you are, and the ripple effects of your own recovery are immeasurable. And it is such a joy to witness. because you guys are so good at this. So, Bronwyn, didn't we talk about grok? You didn't know what the term grok was?
Yeah, I didn't know.
Can you talk about that? One of our earliest conversations was, yeah. Okay.
I don't know, Carl. My
It
brain
was-
is like spinning.
Yeah, you were we were chatting, and you had done I-CBT on yourself, right?
Mhm.
And I want to say this, there's been a lot of conversation about data and evidence. There is a nucleus of people that are now largely the leaders in the community, who all did their first patient was themselves, and they all experienced a level of recovery. I put myself, among the, my own. I will say that, I was in my late 60s and I discovered I-CBT, and it took my recovery to a new level. And, the fact that is a repeated pattern is worth paying attention to. That's anecdotal, but it's really powerful, right? That sort of think about all the treatment, you discover it, you apply it to yourself, and it makes this sort of huge difference in your life, right? That alone is why this deserves attention, right? It can't be placebo, right? Yeah, but you had very early on, it was just so wonderful to watch that it just clicked, right? And grok refers to that science fiction novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, from the 60s and 70s. Your husband knew about it, right? He was in
Right.
it,
Yeah.
right?
No, he did. Yeah. I remember this now. Yeah. So I was like, what does that mean? And you're like, oh, it's from this thing. And I was like, oh. And then, of course, I asked my husband, who's an engineer and a science fiction guy. And of course, he was like, oh, yeah, I totally know what that means. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah. This sort of profound understanding. Yes, there's an understanding, but there's a sort of a level of insight where it just clicks.
Yep.
Right.
It's like it fits. It's just supposed to fit.
Yep.
Are there any other questions or comments right now? This has just been really beautiful. And I'm just so appreciative for all the work that you do and sharing your stories and all of the pain that has come with that with us.
This is our purpose. This is our calling. This is the thing that we've been called to do, is to use our suffering in benefit of others. So thank you all for giving us a platform in which we can do that.
Yeah. Big, huge amounts of gratitude. And I'm sure some of you have heard me say in training or elsewhere that I never, ever, ever wanted to be an OCD specialist, ever, because OCD had been so destructive, right? And then when there weren't people, I was like, fine, go ahead and do it. It was kind of begrudgingly that I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then when I-CBT came, I was like, yes, I get to do this. Like, I love every single second of it. And so for any people watching this later, if anyone happens to come along and they're struggling with OCD, I just want you to know, don't give up, right? 29 years of suffering, almost 30. Katie had a whole bunch of years in there. You saw the numbers. There's a lot, and there's still hope, and hopefully even more things to come. So don't stop thinking that you can get the help you need